Psalm 104. It's an amazing psalm. I didn't put a whole lot of it in because it's a very long psalm, but it's full of beautiful poetry about this earth, this creation, talking about water, all that it does in quenching thirst, making things grow, bringing food to animals and humans. And we know the importance of that from areas that haven't got water in the same way. It's beautiful to look at, birds nesting by the waters, the sun bringing light, the moon darkness, the seasons marked off, the sea vast and teeming with creatures beyond number, ships going to and fro, men and women going out to work and labor until evening. But the verse I wanted to focus on particularly today was the one that sort of in italics that came up, which is number 30, which says, when you send your spirit, they, that's all these creatures, including us, are created, and you renew the face of the earth. Because, of course, the earth is God's first incarnation. It's an expression of the nature of God, the beauty, the incredible abundance of life, of all the species of animals, birds, fish, insects, humans, of rocks and sea and rivers and everything else. That is an expression of God's nature, and therefore, in a sense, his first incarnation of himself here. God's Spirit is not static. He's always creating. He's always renewing. And this creation and us are full of life, meaning, and purpose. And believers knew that even before the coming of Jesus. That's why it's in the Psalm in the Old Testament. Jesus, of course, was the second incarnation. The Word that created the whole world and the universe, the creation, became flesh and dwelt among us. And the incarnation is showing us the nature of God in a human being, able to show us how to live that life in the Spirit given to us, to be lived, and opening the way for us to live in and through that with the Spirit living in us. And that's gone on through the centuries, and will go on until that final glory is revealed. And that's why I chose that second passage, which was read at the beginning by Richard, which comes in Romans chapter 8, when Paul, the Apostle Paul, writes about what's going to happen to this creation at the final days, when he says, we know that the whole creation has been groaning and is pain of childbirth right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we are saved. What he's saying is that creation, in a sense, in a measure, has been in a form of bondage and decay, and that is going to be brought into the glorious freedom together with our glorious freedom. Both creation and ourselves, as part of creation, have the first fruits of the Spirit and are waiting for that final revelation. And Paul says we should wait for that patiently, but he doesn't say that we should wait for it passively, because the Spirit continues to create and renew here and now, and we are part of that. It's not just something, oh, well, you know, this is all coming to fruition in due course, and we've got to wait for all of that. He is doing this day by day. He is creating, the Spirit is creating and renewing this earth all the time. There are many ways in which the Spirit of God is renewing the earth. And we've just been having quite a long period of time talking about this virus and looking at the effects it's having over the whole of the world and different countries, and that Tier 1 film and all the other things that have been said about it. And I think what we can say as we look at that and the way in which churches are coming together, the way in which things are actually being done, is that as part of God's renewing the face of the earth through people acting in those sorts of ways. Yes, we can question whether or not God could have not had a pandemic, but we have these things, and yet we also have a renewing work of God going on through people who are responding to that in those sorts of ways. But I think it's even more than that. One is the fact that we've had huge advances in scientific and medical knowledge. As a result of that, increased understanding and exploration and cooperation of scientists, all of whom are made in the image of God and are able to function through his creative impulse, vaccines have been produced in a very short time to combat the worldwide coronavirus, thereby hugely reducing the number of people dying of the disease. And in the past, plagues and other diseases, pandemics, have ravaged the world to a much greater degree than this one has. Yes, this is a very big thing and people have kept commenting on it. But in comparison with what's happened in the past, it's really quite comparatively small. And over the years, many things we now take for granted have been the result of progress in understanding and knowledge, which have been through people developing things and working at things and saying we are able to cooperate with the Spirit of God in renewing the face of this earth. And what I think I'm wanting to say this morning is that we can all play our small part in this renewing ourselves. When I look back over our lives, Hannah and I have seen how God's Spirit has been active in human terms. We, to be honest with you, are the least likely people to be pioneers, yet somehow we've been that because God has put that sort of spirit within us. 25 to 30 years ago, there was a great separation between business and charity in this country. The worst thing you could say about a business was that it was working like a charity. The worst thing you could say about a charity was that it was working like a business. As we recognized the problems of unemployment and homelessness in the East End of London and wanted to do something about it, we were joined by other Christians from different churches. We linked with another organization concerned for the environment, and they were concerned particularly about the amount of stuff going into landfill sites. And this company that we linked with negotiated contracts with big companies. The first one was HSBC, the bank, which was closing about 15 branches to 20 branches in the center of London and had a huge quantity of furniture that they wanted to get rid of. And of course, in the normal course of events, they'd have had to pay money to the people who do the landfill, and that they would then also cause the environmental problems that landfills do. So this company was able to negotiate prices to be able to take that furniture rather than putting it in the landfill. And we, on our side, ran a warehouse taking on unemployed young people to shift the furniture, store it and sell it to schools and churches and small businesses and other things. And this gave us sort of triple benefit. It saved the furniture landfill, it provided work for unemployed people, and it provided furniture which was of good quality for people that needed that. Hannah, on the other hand, as well, ran a sewing company training and producing cheerleading uniforms in a very competitive environment. Other manufacturers were not only outsourcing their business to cheaper workers abroad, but couldn't possibly spend time or money on training. With a steady customer for our product, we were able to do this. There were other businesses we were involved with as well, and that enabled us to run hostels, not just to provide a roof over people's heads, but of homeless people, many from abroad, but could actually link people with work as well. The thing is, we weren't the only people doing this. Unknown to us, others were starting to do similar things, so that a few years later, a new word was introduced into the public vocabulary, and it was social enterprise and social entrepreneur, to describe that joining of charity and business together, which now generates millions and millions of pounds every year. Because something that was put into wasn't our brilliant idea. God brought people together and ideas together, providing funding to set out for us and for others. And this was able to widen it over the whole country. Now, I believe that is the Spirit of God creating and renewing the face of the earth and using us in our small ways in different places to do it. Because God isn't static. He is constantly on the move. Other Christians launched organizations like street pastors, going out at night to befriend the lonely and the lost, Christians Against Poverty, to help people in debt, very practically by negotiating with creditors over repayment plans. And we were able to duplicate these initiatives in our area. Most of these drew people from different churches in the borough, and we certainly benefited from having many churches and people, but this can happen in smaller communities as well. The lockdown has affected many things over this last 15 months. We in our little Oakleaf community haven't been able to meet physically until very recently. The stable block has been converted and Paul and Colleen and their family have moved in. We've taken the Beatitudes and the rest of the Sermon on the Mount as our study topic over these last weeks. They made the biggest impact on me in my early Christian life and continue to do so. The reason is that they represent a summary of Jesus's teaching about how we should live if we are to cooperate with the Spirit of God in the renewal of the earth. Early on in the Sermon on the Mount, we read, "You are the salt of the earth, and you are the light of the world." So these are big things that he's talking about, which must mean that this is some work that is going on, which is cooperating with the Spirit of God to renew the earth. They're two great qualities. But it isn't just about how we treat creation itself. We've done things practically in London to work things out in the ways that I've described, but it's also about our relationship with one another in those organizations, in those things. It was lovely to hear the talk of the Tear Fund people of the churches working together, being obedient with one another, sharing things, working in that way. When we look at the Sermon on the Mount, we see that humility is a fundamental quality there. We are to be poor in spirit. We're to mourn over ourselves and society around us, to be meek, to be merciful, to be peacemakers. We're to try not to let disagreement turn to anger and revenge by being critical and judgmental, seeing faults in everyone else and not in ourselves. We're to control self-indulgence, to go the extra mile, not to treat others as enemies, to keep a close relationship with God, not with long babbled prayers, but just coming together quietly. Ask, he says, seek, knock, and you'll be given. But ask for wisdom. Mercedes mentioned that earlier on. Miss first, because then you will be asking for the right things, seeking a right way. Don't plan too far ahead. Make sure the foundations of what you're doing are on rock and not on sand. If you're seeking God's kingdom, we can trust for provision. He clothes the lilies of the field, so don't get confused and worried. Practice forgiveness regularly. One of the things that characterized Jesus' own ministry was his fierce anger at the abuse of power and money, as he turned over the tables in the temple and threw accusations against the scribes and the Pharisees. Many of his parables are the same. It's harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God than for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. The Sermon on the Mount is very direct as well. You cannot serve God and mammon. And where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And we need to try as best we can to ensure that our treasure really is in the kingdom and isn't in the money we make. All this sounds very good and upright. Of course, we won't do that all the time. We're going to make a mess of things. We're going to have arguments. We're going to get frustrated. We're going to be disappointed. We're going to get to the points where we doubt whether we're even doing the right thing. We may encounter strong opposition in the things that we are doing. We certainly experienced many, if not all of those things while we were trying to work together in London. And it's hard, it's not an easy task, but we can still come back. God is incredibly forgiving and longing for us to return. We have a patient, forgiving, merciful God who, through Jesus, told us about the father of the prodigal son. And Craig talked about that a little earlier on this morning. So we at Oakley felt that these principles were important for us to grasp together before venturing out on any of our new projects, or any projects at all. It's interesting that the focus of any activity for us turned first to the garden at Manor Stables. That link with creation has been a starting point. We're planning to create a quiet garden for people to come and spend time there, with some aids like a labyrinth and messages about peace and mercy from the Sermon on the Mount, artworks, different parts more formal and others wild, growing vegetables, the hens. And we've begun to do a bit of work like that and would love to see others joining with us. But I've taken Oakley as an example, as that's what I'm most involved with, but the same principles will apply to all the other ministries. The well is about to reopen, which will be very welcome to many of us. And the team under Andy's leadership are looking at ways in which what they do can have a wider impact. Primarily a cafe, it includes a number of other facets, and I know that there is thinking going on in all sorts of directions there. The youth and football work with Willem and Patricia, which has been rumbling along, but has now the opportunity to really open up in a fresh way. Home groups, prayer ministries, and all the other work that goes on in and through Vineyard. I believe we have a very creative God, and because we are made in his image, he's planted creativity in us. So don't let us settle for just doing what we've always done, but allow God to plant ideas in us and make links between us so that we can truly become participants in the Spirit's work of creating and renewing the face of the earth. And I think I'm speaking in a church, I believe, is one of the best ones to achieve that in this area. Unless something drastic is announced tomorrow, we should be, I think, physically worshipping together next Sunday. From then on, we can believe that this will bring us in a new activity of God's Spirit and a unity of ourselves as we seek God's mission and purpose for us all in these coming days. Amen.